Jake Iron Morrison thought he'd found the perfect place to disappear. After 40 years on the road with his Harley and a past he'd rather forget, the run-down desert cabin seemed like salvation. No neighbors for miles, just silence and sand. All he wanted was to drink his coffee in peace and watch the sunrise over the endless horizon. But on his first night in the cabin, strange scratching sounds from the back room shattered his dreams of solitude. When he pushed open that hidden door, expecting maybe raccoons or desert rats, his weathered heart nearly stopped. Two small faces stared back at him from the shadows, wide-eyed with terror and hunger. A little girl clutching a smaller boy, both thin as desert weeds. In that moment, Jake realized his quiet retirement had just become something he never expected. But how did these children end up hiding in his cabin? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Mojave Desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of burnt orange and deep purple as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Jake Morrison killed the engine of his 1987 Harley-Davidson and let the silence wash over him. 43 years old, with silver threading through his dark beard and scars mapping stories across his knuckles, he looked like a man who'd seen too much and said too little. The cabin squatted before him like a forgotten prayer, its weathered wood bleached grey by decades of desert Sunday. The realtor had called it rustic charm, but Jake saw it for what it really was, a place where a man could disappear without anyone asking questions. Perfect. He reached into his leather jacket and felt the familiar weight of his old Brotherhood patch, the one he'd carefully removed from his vest 3 months ago. The Crimson Reapers. 22 years of his life stitched into that piece of fabric, 22 years of being Jake Iron Morrison, the club's enforcer, the man other men crossed the street to avoid. But that life was behind him now, had to be. The cabin's previous owner, a man named Carlisle, had died of a heart attack. No family, no heirs, just a property that needed selling fast. Jake had paid cash, no questions asked, no background checks required, the kind of transaction that suited both parties perfectly. He pulled his duffel bag from the bike's saddlebags and walked to the front door. The key turned easily, too easily for a place that had been empty for months. Jake's instincts, honed by years of watching his back in the club, whispered warnings. But he was tired of listening to those voices, tired of sleeping with one eye open. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by windows that framed the endless desert. The kitchen was basic, a propane stove, an old refrigerator that hummed like a dying animal, cabinets that had seen better decades. But it was clean, and it was his. Jake set his bag on the wooden table and pulled out a bottle of bourbon. He'd earned this drink, this moment of peace. Behind him, his Harley ticked as the engine cooled, a familiar sound that had been his lullaby for more years than he cared to count. The Brotherhood patch lay on the table beside the bottle, its red and black colors still vibrant despite everything. He remembered the day he'd earned it, beaten 3 men unconscious outside a Phoenix bar to prove his loyalty. He remembered the weight of the gun in his waistband during collections, the fear in debtors' eyes when they saw him coming. He remembered Marcus telling him he was the best enforcer the Reapers had ever had. And he remembered Sarah. Jake poured 3 fingers of bourbon and drank it down like medicine. Sarah had been a bartender at their usual haunt, a woman with kind eyes who'd somehow seen past the leather and the reputation to the man underneath. She'd made him believe he could be different, better. For 6 months, she'd been his reason to consider walking away from the club. Then Marcus found out. Jake poured another drink, his hands steady despite the memories. The club didn't tolerate divided loyalties, and Marcus had made that crystal clear. Jake had come home to find Sarah's apartment empty, a note on the kitchen counter written in Marcus's distinctive scrawl. Some choices can't be undone. Stay loyal. Iron. He'd never seen Sarah again. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of going through the motions, of pretending everything was normal while planning his exit. The club had rules about leaving, most of them involved a coffin. But Jake had dirt on half the Brotherhood, including Marcus, and he'd made it clear that information would find its way to the right authorities if anything happened to him. It was a delicate détente, built on mutual assured destruction. Now, sitting in his desert sanctuary, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine quiet. No rumble of motorcycles, no shouting matches over territory, no phone calls in the middle of the night demanding his services. Just silence, stretching out like a promise. He walked to the window and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow, he'd start figuring out how to be Jake Morrison without the iron. Maybe he'd learned to cook something besides beans from a can. Maybe he'd read a book that wasn't about motorcycles or warfare. Maybe he'd remember what it felt like to sleep through the night without checking the locks 3 times. The desert wind picked up, rattling the windows like fingers on glass. Jake finished his bourbon and headed for the bedroom, ready for the first peaceful night he'd had in 22 years. Sleep came easier than Jake expected, the desert silence wrapping around him like a blanket. But at 3 in the morning, a sound jerked him awake, a soft scratching, like claws on wood, coming from somewhere deeper in the cabin. Jake lay still, listening. His hand instinctively moved to where his knife usually rested on the nightstand, but he'd packed it away with his old life. The scratching came again, rhythmic and deliberate, too steady for an animal, too quiet for an intruder. He slipped from bed and padded barefoot across the cold wooden floor. The scratching seemed to come from behind the kitchen, where he'd noticed a door earlier but assumed it led to a pantry or storage closet. In the moonlight streaming through the windows, he could see the door was slightly ajar. The scratching stopped. Jake approached slowly, every instinct from his old life screaming caution. He'd learned long ago that the quiet moments were often the most dangerous. His fingers found the door handle, rough wood, worn smooth by decades of use. He pushed it open. 2 pairs of eyes stared back at him from the darkness, wide with terror and reflecting the pale moonlight like a frightened animal's. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Children, a girl, maybe 8 years old, clutching a smaller boy who couldn't be more than 5. Both were thin, their clothes dirty and torn, their faces gaunt with hunger. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered, and both children flinched at his voice. The girl, dark hair matted against her head, dark eyes that had seen too much, pulled the boy closer to her chest. The boy buried his face against her shoulder, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Neither of them made a sound, but Jake could see their small bodies shaking with fear. "Hey," Jake said softly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's eyes darted past him toward the front door, calculating distances, measuring escape routes. Smart kid. Jake raised his hands slowly, showing his empty palms. "My name's Jake," he said, crouching down to make himself less threatening. "What are your names?" The girl's mouth opened, then closed. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Emma." "Emma?" Jake repeated gently. "That's a pretty name. And who's this little guy?" Emma looked down at the boy in her arms. "Tommy. He's my brother." "Hi, Tommy," Jake said, but the boy didn't look up. Jake's mind raced. How long had they been here? Where were their parents? The cabin had been empty for months. Surely they hadn't been hiding here all that time. But they looked malnourished, their clothes hanging loose on their small frames. "Are you hungry?" Jake asked. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday," Emma said. "I found some crackers in one of the boxes." Jake felt something twist in his chest, an unfamiliar ache. He'd seen violence, had dished out his share of it, but the sight of these 2 children, alone and starving, hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. "Okay," he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I've got food, real food. Are you willing to come out of there?" Emma hesitated, her arms tightening around Tommy. "You won't call the police?" The question surprised him. Why would a child be afraid of the police? "No," Jake said. "No police. Just food." Slowly, carefully, Emma helped Tommy to his feet. They were both smaller than Jake had initially thought, malnutrition making them seem younger and more fragile. Emma kept one hand on Tommy's shoulder, guiding him but ready to pull him back into the shadows at the first sign of threat. Jake backed away from the door, giving them space. In the kitchen, he moved deliberately, opening cabinets and pulling out supplies: canned soup, crackers, a jar of peanut butter. Simple things, but nutritious. "You can sit at the table," Jake said, not looking directly at them. He'd learned that direct eye contact could feel threatening to the frightened. Emma led Tommy to the wooden chairs, both children perching on the edge, as if ready to bolt. Jake heated the soup on the propane stove, the familiar routine of cooking somehow calming. When he turned back, he found a folded piece of paper on the floor where the children had been hiding. A drawing in crayon. A house with stick figures, 2 adults, 2 children, all holding hands under a smiling Sunday. At the bottom, in a child's careful letters, "My family." Jake's throat tightened. He folded the drawing carefully and set it on the counter, then ladled soup into 2 bowls. The children ate like starved animals, spooning the soup into their mouths so fast, Jake worried they might choke. He sat across from them at the wooden table, nursing a cup of coffee and trying to process what he'd stumbled into. His emergency food cache, military-grade survival rations he'd kept from his army, days before the club sat in a corner cabinet, enough supplies to last months if rationed properly. "Slow down there, buddy," Jake said gently when Tommy started coughing on a piece of cracker. The boy's eyes widened in fear, but Jake just slid a glass of water across the table. "Nobody's going to take it away from you." Emma watched Jake's every movement, her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Trust would take time, he realized. These kids had been burned before. "How long have you been hiding in that room?" Jake asked. Emma glanced at Tommy, then back at Jake. 3 days, maybe 4, hard to tell. "And before that?" She shrugged, a gesture too mature for her 8 years. "Different places. We move around a lot." Jake studied their faces in the lamplight. Emma had their mother's eyes. He guessed intelligent and cautious. Tommy looked more like their father, with a stubborn set to his jaw even in his exhaustion. Both children bore the invisible weight of secrets too heavy for their shoulders. "Where are your parents, Emma?" The spoon trembled in her hand. They had to go away. For work." The way she said it, the careful phrasing, told Jake she was reciting something she'd been taught to say. Someone had coached these children on what story to tell. "What kind of work?" "Important work," Emma said, her voice smaller now. "They said they'd come back for us. They always come back." But her eyes said she was no longer sure. Jake finished his coffee and moved to the kitchen, partly to give the children space and partly to think. In his duffel bag, he found his old first aid kit, another relic from his military days. Both children had cuts and scrapes that needed attention, and Emma had what looked like rope burns on her wrists. "Mind if I take a look at those cuts?" he asked, returning to the table. Emma instinctively pulled her arms closer to her body. "We're fine." "I'm sure you are, but infections are nasty things out here in the desert. Just want to make sure everything's clean." It took another 10 minutes of gentle coaxing before Emma extended her arm. The rope burns were old, mostly healed, but Jake's jaw tightened as he cleaned them with antiseptic. Someone had tied this child up. The thought made his hands shake with barely controlled rage. "Who did this to you?" Emma pulled her arm back quickly. "Nobody. I fell." "Emma." Jake's voice was soft but firm. "I've seen rope burns before. That's not from falling." She looked at Tommy, who had finished his soup and was now fighting to keep his eyes open. The boy's exhaustion was winning. "Can Tommy sleep?" Emma asked, deflecting the question. "He's really tired." Jake looked at the couch in the main room, then at Emma's protective posture. These children weren't going to be separated, not after whatever they'd been through. "You can both sleep on the couch. I'll get some blankets." He found clean linens in a closet and made up the couch as best he could. Tommy was already asleep in Emma's arms, his small body curled against his sister like a kitten seeking warmth. Jake watched Emma settle them both under the blankets, her movements careful and practiced. "Emma," he said quietly, "you don't have to tell me everything tonight. But I need you to know whatever happened before, whatever you're running from, you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you while you're with me." She looked up at him, studying his face in the dim light. "Promise?" The word hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked him to promise anything good? When was the last time his word had meant protection instead of threat? "I promise," he said, and meant it. Emma nodded and closed her eyes, but Jake could tell she wasn't really sleeping. She was listening, alert for any sound that might mean danger had found them again. Jake settled into the chair by the window, looking out at the endless desert. His motorcycle sat outside like a monument to his old life, chrome and steel that had carried him away from everything he'd known. But now, watching these two children sleep fitfully on his couch, he realized his journey was far from over. He thought about his emergency supplies, his military training, his knowledge of how to live off the grid, skills he'd never thought he'd use to protect innocence, skills that might be the only thing standing between these children and whatever they were running from. The desert wind picked up again, rattling the windows, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. Jake wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. Jake woke to the smell of something burning. He jerked upright in the chair where he'd dozed off, his neck stiff from sleeping, sitting up. Smoke was curling from the kitchen, and Emma stood on a chair at the stove, frantically waving a dish towel at a pan. "It's okay," she said quickly when she saw him moving. "I was just trying to make breakfast." I'm sorry. "Hey, it's fine," Jake said, moving to turn off the burner. The eggs were black around the edges, but salvageable. "You don't have to apologize for trying to help." Tommy sat at the table, clutching something in his small fist. When Jake looked closer, he saw it was half of a photograph, torn raggedly down the middle. The image showed two children, Emma and Tommy, but the other half, where their parents would have been, was missing. "Where did you get that, buddy?" Jake asked gently. Tommy looked at Emma, who nodded. "He carries it everywhere," she said. "It's all we have left of them." Jake sat down at the table, careful to keep his movements slow and unthreatening. "Can you tell me about your parents? What were their names?" Emma's hand went instinctively to her pocket, where Jake suspected she kept the other half of the photo. Mum was Sarah, Dad was David. They were reporters. The name hit Jake like a punch to the gut. Sarah. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but Emma was sharp. She caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Did you know her?" Emma asked, her voice small and hopeful. Jake's mind raced. Sarah Mitchell, the bartender who'd stolen his heart and disappeared on Marcus's orders. But Sarah, the reporter? It didn't make sense. Unless, what was your mom's last name before she married your dad? "Carter," Emma said. Sarah Carter. Relief and confusion warred in Jake's chest. Different Sarah, but the coincidence felt wrong, too convenient. In his experience, there were no coincidences, only patterns you hadn't recognized yet. "Emma," Jake said carefully, "when your parents went away for work, did they say what kind of story they were working on?" She bit her lip, clearly debating how much to reveal. Tommy watched her with complete trust, waiting for his big sister to decide what was safe to share. "They said they were investigating bad people, people who hurt children." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "They said if something happened to them, we should run and hide until someone good found us." "And how would you know if someone was good?" Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, creased from folding and unfolding. She handed it to Jake with trembling fingers. It was a list, written in careful handwriting, safe words, phone numbers, addresses, and at the bottom, in different ink, as if added later, "If all else fails, trust the Iron Horse." Jake stared at the paper, his blood turning cold. Iron Horse, his old call sign from the military, before he became Iron with the Brotherhood. How could these children's parents know about that? "Emma." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Where did your parents get this information?" "I don't know. Mom wrote it down before they left. She said if we ever found someone called Iron Horse, we'd be safe." Jake's hands were shaking now. This wasn't random. These children hadn't just happened to end up in his cabin by accident. Someone had planned this, had known he would be here. "What happened the night your parents left?" he asked. Emma looked at Tommy again, then back at Jake. "Men came to our house. Bad men. Mom and Dad put us in the car and drove really fast. They kept checking the mirrors, talking in whispers. When we got to the motel, they said they had to go back to get something important. Evidence. Evidence of what? The bad people stealing children, making them disappear. Emma's voice was barely audible now. Mom said they had proof, but they needed to get it before the bad people found out. Jake felt the world shifting around him, puzzle pieces clicking into place. These children's parents weren't just reporters investigating trafficking, they were journalists who'd gotten too close to something dangerous. And somehow, they'd known about Jake, known he'd be here. Emma, the men who came to your house, did you see them clearly? She nodded, her face pale. One of them had a scar here. She traced a line down her cheek. And a tattoo on his neck. A snake. Jake's blood froze. Marcus Kellerman, the Crimson Reaper's president, had both those distinguishing marks. The Brotherhood wasn't just involved in trafficking, they were at the center of it. And somehow, Sarah and David Carter had been hunting them. Jake excused himself and walked outside, needing air and space to think. The morning sun was already heating the desert, but he felt cold to his bones. Marcus and the Reapers involved in child trafficking. Sarah and David Carter dead because they'd gotten too close to the truth. And somehow, through channels he couldn't fathom, they'd known to send their children to him. He paced beside his Harley, mind racing through possibilities. Then he remembered something from his first night. The key had turned too easily in the lock, as if someone had been using it recently. Back inside, Jake found the children finishing the salvaged eggs. Emma, I need to look around the cabin more carefully. You two stay right here, okay? He started in the bedroom, checking for loose floorboards, hidden compartments, anything that might explain how the children had ended up here. In the closet, behind a stack of old blankets, his fingers found something hard and rectangular. A burner phone. Jake powered it on, and the screen showed 17 missed calls, all from the same number. The voicemail inbox was full. He selected the most recent message, dated 5 days ago. Carlisle, this is David. If you're getting this, we're blown. Sarah and I are going back for the evidence tonight. The children are safe where you told us. If we don't make contact in 48 hours, you know what that means. The Iron Horse file is in the usual place. God, help us all. Jake's hands trembled as he scrolled through the call log, dozens of calls between this phone and David Carter over the past 6 months. The previous owner, Carlisle, hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been murdered, and somehow these phones had been part of an investigation that got both him and the Carter family killed. Another voicemail, this one from 3 weeks ago. The network goes deeper than we thought. Federal agents, local cops, judges, they're all on Marcus's payroll. We can't trust anyone official. The only clean contact we have is your military friend. If something happens to us, the children know to wait for Iron Horse. Jake sank onto the bed, the phone heavy in his hands. Carlisle had been feeding information to the Carters about the trafficking network. Somehow, Carlisle had known about Jake's military service, about his call sign, about his connection to Marcus and the Brotherhood. The old man had arranged for Jake to buy this specific cabin, had prepared it as a safe house. But who was Carlisle, and how had he known so much? Jake checked the phone's photo gallery and found images that made his stomach turn. Pictures of children being loaded into unmarked vans, financial records showing payments to law enforcement officials, and photos of Marcus Kellerman meeting with men in expensive suits, men who definitely weren't bikers. One photo made him stop breathing altogether. Marcus shaking hands with a federal agent, both men smiling like old friends. Jake recognized the agent from news reports, Deputy Director James Richardson, supposedly a champion of child protection services. The trafficking network wasn't just local, it was federal. Jake, Emma's voice came from the doorway. Are you okay? You look sick. Jake quickly powered off the phone and slipped it into his pocket. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. About us? Jake knelt down to her level. Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what happened after your parents left that night. She wrapped her arms around herself. We waited at the motel like they said, but they never came back. In the morning, there was a knock on the door. A man said he was FBI, that our parents had been in an accident. Did you go with him? No. Mom had told us not to trust anyone in a uniform, no matter what they said. We climbed out the bathroom window and ran. Emma's voice grew smaller. We've been running for 2 weeks. How did you know to come here? Mum gave us an address. She said if the safe words didn't work with anyone we met, to go to this cabin and wait for Iron Horse. She said you'd protect us. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar jacket. These children's parents had died, trusting him to keep their kids safe. A man named Carlisle had died setting up this safe house. And somewhere out there, Marcus and his corrupt network were hunting for Emma and Tommy. Emma, the man who said he was FBI, did you see his face clearly? She nodded. He had grey hair and a scar through his eyebrow. Tommy drew a picture of him. Jake's blood chilled. Deputy Director Richardson. The corruption went straight to the top, and they had federal resources hunting for 2, 8, and 5-year-old children. The burner phone buzzed in his pocket. New message. We know where you are, Iron. Bring us the children and the evidence, and we might let you live. You have 48 hours. Jake deleted the threatening message and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. 48 hours. He'd worked with less time before, back when he wore a different kind of uniform and served a country that still believed in honor. Emma, Tommy, he called, walking back to the main room. We need to have a serious talk. Both children looked up from the couch where they'd been sitting quietly, their expressions instantly wary. Jake pulled a chair close to them and sat down, careful to keep his body language open and non-threatening. I want to show you something, he said, reaching into his duffel bag. His fingers found the small metal case he'd kept since his army days, and he pulled out his dog tags. The metal was worn smooth in places, but the engraving was still clear. Morrison, Jacob T., Staff Sergeant. United States Army. Tommy's eyes widened. You were a soldier? I was, Jake said, letting Tommy hold the tags, for 8 years, before I made some bad choices and ended up with the wrong crowd. Emma studied his face. What kind of soldier? The kind who protected people who couldn't protect themselves, like you two. Jake had never talked about his military service with anyone from the Brotherhood. That part of his life had been carefully buried, pushed down beneath years of violence and moral compromise. But sitting here with these children, he felt echoes of the man he'd been before Marcus Kellerman had recruited him into the Reapers. My unit specialized in getting people out of dangerous situations, Jake continued. Hostage rescue, mostly. We'd go in when everything else had failed, when people were trapped and scared and needed someone to bring them home. Did you save a lot of people? Tommy asked, his small fingers tracing the raised letters on the dog tags. Some, not as many as I should have. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, is that why our mom and dad sent us to you? Because you save people? Jake met her eyes, seeing intelligence and pain that no 8-year-old should carry. I think so, and I think they were very smart to do it. He spent the next hour teaching them basic safety protocols, using simple language but serious intent. How to recognize the sound of vehicles approaching from a distance, which windows offered the best escape routes, where he kept emergency supplies, and how to access them if he wasn't available. This isn't a game, he told them as he showed Emma how to work the hand-crank emergency radio. Bad people are looking for you, and they won't give up easily. But I'm going to keep you safe, just like your parents wanted. What if something happens to you? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake pulled out a small notebook and wrote down a series of numbers and addresses. If I'm not here, and you're in immediate danger, you use that radio to contact these people. They're good soldiers, like I used to be. They'll help you. Tommy had been unusually quiet since breakfast, but now he spoke up. Jake, will you teach me to be strong like you? The question hit Jake unexpectedly hard. He looked at this 5-year-old boy, small for his age and bearing invisible scars from whatever he'd witnessed, asking to learn strength from a man who'd spent years using his strength to hurt people. I can teach you to be brave, Jake said carefully, and smart, and how to protect people you care about. But real strength isn't about fighting, Tommy. It's about choosing to do the right thing, even when it's scary. Jake carved a small wooden horse from a piece of scrap wood he found in the cabin's utility closet, his army knife making precise cuts while the children watched in fascination. He'd learned woodworking during his recovery from a shrapnel wound in Afghanistan, a quiet skill that had kept his hands busy and his mind calm. For you, he said, handing the finished horse to Tommy. "Something to remind you that you're safe here." Tommy clutched the wooden horse to his chest, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time since Jake had found them. That evening, as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, Jake sat with the children on the cabin's small porch. Emma had found an old deck of cards and was teaching Tommy to play Go Fish, their laughter carrying across the empty landscape. "Jake," Emma said during a quiet moment, "do you think our parents are really gone?" Jake looked at her, this brave little girl who'd been protecting her brother through unimaginable circumstances, and decided she deserved honesty. "I think they loved you both so much that they risked everything to keep you safe," he said, "and I think they'd be very proud of how brave you've been." Emma nodded, accepting the truth she'd probably known all along but hadn't been ready to face. "We're going to be okay," she said, and Jake realized she was comforting him as much as herself. Jake woke before dawn, his internal alarm clock still set to military precision. Something was wrong. The desert was too quiet, even the usual sounds of nocturnal animals had stopped. He slipped from his chair and moved to the window, scanning the horizon. There, in the distance, dust trails caught the first light of sunrise. Vehicles, at least 3 of them, moving slowly across the desert floor. Too far away to make out details, but close enough to be a problem. He checked on the children. Emma and Tommy were still asleep on the couch, Emma's arm protectively wrapped around her brother. Jake grabbed his binoculars from his gear and returned to the window. Black SUVs, government plates. They were conducting a grid search pattern, methodically covering ground. Professional, patient, thorough. Jake counted 6 vehicles total, spread across a mile-wide front. They'd reach the cabin by noon if they maintained their current pace. Jake moved quietly to his duffel bag and pulled out items he'd hoped never to need again. Tactical binoculars, encrypted radio, combat knife. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in an old t-shirt, his service pistol. He'd kept it despite everything, though he'd never told anyone in the Brotherhood about it. The burner phone buzzed. Another message. "Time's running out, Iron. We have the whole area surrounded. Make this easy on everyone." Jake powered off the phone and removed the battery. They were tracking it, using it to narrow their search grid. He should have realized that earlier his operational skills were rusty from years of the Brotherhood's crude methods. "Jake?" Emma's voice was small, concerned. She was sitting up on the couch, having awakened to find him armed and alert. "We've got company coming," Jake said quietly. "Nothing to panic about, but we need to be ready to move." Emma gently shook Tommy awake. "Remember what Jake taught us yesterday? About being ready?" Tommy nodded sleepily, clutching his wooden horse. Jake had spent time the previous evening identifying potential escape routes and cache points around the cabin. Old military habits always have an exit strategy, always know the terrain better than your enemy. The desert was harsh, but it offered advantages to someone who knew how to use them. He showed the children to a crawl space beneath the cabin's back porch, accessible through a loose board he'd discovered. Inside, he'd placed water, food, and the emergency radio. "If I tell you to run, you come here first," Jake instructed. "Wait until you're sure it's safe, then use the radio to call for help. The frequencies are already programmed." "What about you?" Emma asked. "I'll find you. I promise." Jake returned to surveillance, watching the search pattern evolve. The vehicles had spread out further now, each one taking a different quadrant. Professional coordination, probably federal agents working with Marcus's people. They had resources he couldn't match in a straight fight, but they didn't know the terrain like he did. Jake spent the morning preparing defensive positions around the cabin. Simple things, lengths of wire that would trip up anyone approaching in the dark, small mirror fragments positioned to reflect sunlight and temporarily blind attackers, escape caches hidden at strategic points. He found surveillance photos stuffed behind a loose stone in the cabin's foundation, black and white prints showing the cabin from multiple angles, taken with telephoto lenses. Timestamps from the past week. They'd been watching this place long before Jake arrived. "Emma," Jake called her over, "look at these. Have you seen anyone taking pictures like this?" She studied the photos, her face pale. "There was a man with a big camera, 2 days before you came. He was hiding behind those rocks." She pointed to an outcropping about a quarter mile from the cabin. "Did he see you?" I don't think so. Tommy and I stayed hidden like Mom taught us. Jake nodded, but inwardly he cursed. They'd known exactly where the children were, had probably known for days. The 48-hour ultimatum was theater. They were already closing the net. By midday, the search vehicles had halted about 2 miles out, forming a loose perimeter around the cabin. Jake watched through binoculars as figures emerged, too distant to identify but moving with military precision. Setting up a staging area, preparing for a coordinated assault, his encrypted radio crackled to life. An old frequency from his army days, one that technically shouldn't have been active anymore. Iron Horse, this is Ghost Rider. You've got a problem coming your way. Jake's heart jumped. Ghost Rider was Danny Martinez, his old squad leader from Afghanistan. A man who'd saved his life more times than either of them could count. Ghost Rider, what's your location? About 10 clicks north of your position. Saw the federal convoy moving in. Figured you might need backup. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, reinforced by reliable allies. 2 packages with me, Jake transmitted. High value. Need safe extraction. Copy that. We'll make it happen. Stand by for coordinates. The radio went silent, but Jake felt the tactical situation shifting. He wasn't alone anymore. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Jake worked to reinforce the cabin's defenses, but inside, a different kind of warmth was growing. Emma had appointed herself his assistant, handing him tools and asking careful questions about each preparation. Tommy sat nearby, whittling with a butter knife under Jake's supervision, working on his own small wooden figure. "Why do you know so much about protecting people?" Emma asked, as Jake checked the sightlines from each window. "Started learning when I was about your age," Jake said, adjusting a mirror fragment to create a blind spot for anyone approaching from the east. "My dad was career military. He taught me that the world can be dangerous, but you don't have to be helpless." "What happened to your dad?" Jake paused, a memory hitting him unexpectedly. "He died when I was 15, car accident. After that, I kind of lost my way for a while." Emma nodded solemnly. "That's when you joined the bad motorcycle people?" "Eventually, yeah. I was angry and stupid and thought being tough meant being mean." Jake looked at her directly. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then." Tommy held up his carving, a rough but recognizable horse, similar to the one Jake had made for him. "Look, Jake, it's like yours." Jake examined the boy's work with genuine appreciation. "That's excellent craftsmanship, buddy. You've got steady hands." "Emma taught me to be careful. She says careful is better than fast. Your sister's a smart lady." Emma blushed at the compliment, but Jake could see how much it meant to her. These children had been taking care of each other for weeks, with Emma carrying responsibilities no 8-year-old should bear. "Emma," Jake said, "you know you don't have to take care of everything by yourself anymore, right? It's okay to let someone else worry about the big stuff." She looked at him with those 2 wise eyes. "What if you go away like Mom and Dad did?" The question was direct, honest, and heartbreaking. Jake set down his tools and sat cross-legged on the floor so he was at her eye level. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Your parents had to leave because they were trying to stop bad people from hurting other children. That was brave, but it was also dangerous. I'm not leaving you 2 alone again. But what if the bad people make you?" Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his dog tags, pressing them into Emma's small hands. "See these? In the army we have a saying, no one left behind. That means we never abandon the people we're responsible for. Never." Emma closed her fingers around the metal tags. "Even if it's scary, especially if it's scary." Tommy had abandoned his carving and was listening intently. "Jake, are we your responsibility now?" The question caught Jake off guard with its innocence and directness. In the span of 3 days, these children had become more important to him than anything else in his life. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. "Yeah, buddy, you are. Good," Tommy said, returning to his carving with satisfaction. "I like being your responsibility." That evening, as the search perimeter held its position in the distance, Jake taught the children a card game his father had shown him during long summer evenings at their old house in Colorado. The game required strategy and patience, qualities these children had developed far too early, but that might serve them well in the days ahead. "My dad used to say this game taught you to think 3 moves ahead." Jake explained as he dealt the cards. Always know what you're going to do before you have to do it. Like how you knew where to hide us under the porch, Emma asked. Exactly like that. They played until the desert stars appeared, brilliant in the clear sky. Tommy fell asleep against Jake's shoulder during the final hand, the wooden horse clutched in one small fist. Emma helped Jake carry her brother to the couch, tucking the blankets around him with practiced care. "Jake," Emma whispered as they stood watching Tommy sleep, "when this is over, when the bad people stop looking for us, what happens then?" Jake looked down at her upturned face, seeing hope and fear warring in her expression. He thought about his old life, about the empty years ahead he'd planned to spend alone in this desert cabin, drinking bourbon and watching sunsets until his liver or his conscience finally gave out. "Then we figure out how to be a family," he said. Emma smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he'd seen from her, and slipped her small hand into his calloused one. "I'd like that," she said. Jake squeezed her hand gently, sealing a promise that went deeper than words. Outside, the desert wind carried the distant sound of engines idling, but inside the cabin, something precious was taking root. Something worth fighting for. Something worth dying for, if it came to that. Jake woke to the sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Dawn was still an hour away, but the search teams weren't waiting for sunrise. Through his binoculars, he counted 3 aircraft conducting systematic sweeps, their searchlights carving white paths across the desert floor. The tactical radio crackled softly. "Iron Horse, Ghost Rider, they've escalated. Thermal imaging on those birds." Jake keyed the radio quietly, moving away from where the children slept. "Copy, Ghost Rider. What's your assessment?" "Federal task force, but not standard issue. These guys are equipped for military operations. Someone's throwing serious resources at this." Jake processed that information. Standard FBI wouldn't have access to military-grade helicopters and thermal equipment. This was Black Ops-level funding, which meant the corruption went higher than he'd imagined. "Any word on who's bankrolling this party?" "Still working on that. But Iron, you need to know they're not planning to take prisoners. Rules of engagement are shoot first, ask questions later." Jake's blood chilled. They weren't just hunting the children to silence them. They were planning to eliminate everyone who knew about the trafficking network, including him. He checked on Emma and Tommy, both still sleeping peacefully despite the distant helicopter noise. Their trust in his ability to protect them was absolute, and that trust was about to be tested in ways he'd hoped to avoid. The tactical radio was military surplus from his Delta Force days, encrypted and operating on frequencies that officially didn't exist. Danny Martinez had maintained contacts throughout the Special Operations community, men who'd learned to question orders when those orders conflicted with honor. "Ghost Rider, I need intelligence on the federal players. Who's running this operation?" "Working on it. Got a contact in DC who owes me favors. But Iron, there's something else. Your old Brotherhood, they're part of the hunting party." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Marcus had brought the Reapers into this, turning it into a personal vendetta as well as a cover-up operation. The combination of federal resources and street-level violence would be formidable. "How many Reapers?" "Dozen riders, maybe more. They're positioned on the south approach, waiting for the Federals to flush you out." Jake moved to his equipment cache and pulled out items he hadn't touched in years. Combat knife, tactical vest, extra ammunition for his service pistol. The weight of the gear felt familiar, muscle memory from another life awakening. Emma stirred on the couch, her eyes finding him immediately. "Jake, what's happening?" "Just checking our perimeter, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Emma was too observant to be fooled by casual reassurances. She saw the tactical gear, the radio, the tension in his posture. "They're coming, aren't they?" Jake knelt beside the couch, keeping his voice low to avoid waking Tommy. "Soon, yeah, but we're ready for them. Are you scared?" The question surprised him with its directness. "A little," he admitted, "but not about keeping you and Tommy safe. I know how to do that." Emma reached out and touched the combat knife on his belt. "You were a soldier before you were a bad person." "Yeah, and now you're a good person who used to be a soldier." Jake looked at this 8-year-old child who somehow understood the complexities of identity and redemption better than most adults. "That's exactly right." The radio crackled again. Iron Horse, we've got movement. Ground teams are mobilizing. Estimate 30 minutes before they reach your position. Jake acknowledged the transmission and began final preparations. He activated the emergency beacon that would signal Danny's team, then gathered essential supplies into a tactical pack: food, water, medical kit, ammunition, the encrypted radio. Emma, wake Tommy up. We need to move to the safe position. As Emma gently roused her brother, Jake took one last look around the cabin that had briefly been their home. 3 days ago, this place had represented escape from his past. Now it was about to become a battlefield in a war he'd never chosen but couldn't avoid. Tommy appeared at his side, clutching the wooden horse and looking remarkably alert for a 5-year-old awakened before dawn. Is it time to be brave, Jake? It's time to be smart, Jake corrected. Brave is just a bonus. He led them to the hidden crawl space beneath the back porch, settling them into the concealed position with practiced efficiency. The space was cramped but well ventilated, stocked with enough supplies to last several days if necessary. Remember the rules, Jake said as he activated a small LED light for them. Stay quiet, stay hidden, use the radio only if I don't come back. Emma nodded solemnly, but Tommy grabbed Jake's sleeve. You will come back, right? Jake looked into the boy's trusting eyes and made a promise he hoped he could keep. I'll always come back for you two. That's what families do. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, accompanied now by the rumble of ground vehicles approaching from multiple directions. The hunt had begun. Jake positioned himself at the cabin's front window, service pistol ready, when a familiar voice called out from the darkness. Iron Horse, it's Ghost Rider, coming in from your 6. Relief flooded through Jake as Danny Martinez emerged from the desert scrub, moving with the same careful precision Jake remembered from their Delta Force days. 15 years older, hair more grey than black, but the same steady eyes that had never failed to watch Jake's back. Jesus, Danny, you're a sight for sore eyes. Figured you could use some help. Danny carried a military-grade tactical pack and wore desert camouflage that made him nearly invisible in the pre-dawn light. Brought some party favors. They clasped hands briefly, the greeting of men who'd shared foxholes and trusted each other with their lives. Danny's presence changed everything. Jake was no longer facing impossible odds alone. What's the tactical situation? Jake asked, falling back into military protocol. Federal Task Force, 37 personnel, supported by 12 Crimson Reapers. They've got you surrounded, but they're being cautious. Somebody told them you're dangerous. I am dangerous, Danny grinned. That's what I love about you, Iron. Never lacked confidence. Jake led Danny inside, keeping their voices low. The children are secure. But Danny, this isn't just about them anymore. This trafficking network goes federal, maybe international. We're not just fighting bikers and corrupt cops. I know. Danny pulled a tablet from his pack, showing satellite images of the surrounding area. My contact in DC sent this. Operation Nightfall, off-the-books funding, run by Deputy Director Richardson. They're calling it a terrorist extraction. Jake studied the deployment patterns on the screen. Professional, coordinated, deadly. They've branded us terrorists? 2 dead federal agents in Phoenix last week. Officially, you killed them while resisting arrest. I've been here for 3 days. Since when do facts matter in Black Ops? Danny zoomed in on the images. But here's the interesting part. Richardson's funding comes from a shell company traced back to Marcus Kellerman. Your old president is paying the federal government to hunt you down. Jake felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. The Brotherhood isn't just involved in trafficking, they're funding the cover-up operation. Gets better. Carlisle, the guy who owned this cabin, former CIA, he was running a private investigation into the network when they killed him, made it look like a heart attack. Jake thought about the burner phone, the careful preparation of the cabin as a safe house, the way everything had been orchestrated to bring him here. Carlisle knew I'd end up here. He knew Marcus would eventually move against you. Figured when that happened, you'd need somewhere to disappear. The children showing up was just unfortunate timing. Danny pulled out his combat knife, a familiar K-bar that Jake recognized from Afghanistan. The blade was worn but perfectly maintained, like the man who carried it. How many people do you have? 4. Counting me. All Delta veterans, all reliable. We're outnumbered 10-1, but we've got advantages they don't expect. Such as, they think they're hunting a rogue biker. They don't know they're dealing with the team that held off 200 Taliban fighters at Kandahar Ridge. Jake remembered that day. Pinned down for 18 hours, ammunition running low, air support delayed by sandstorms, but they'd held their position, protected the civilians in their care, and extracted everyone alive. What's the plan? Danny spread a detailed map across the table. We turn their advantages against them. They've got superior numbers and equipment, but they're operating in unfamiliar territory with mixed command structure. Federal agents don't trust bikers. Bikers don't follow federal protocols. Classic coordination failure. Exactly. We hit them where they're weakest: communication and logistics. Take out their command vehicle, scatter their forces, then extract through the Northwest Canyon. Jake studied the plan, mentally calculating distances and timing. It was audacious, risky, and probably their only chance. The children come with us, every step. We don't leave our people behind. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat, tempered now by something deeper. In Afghanistan, they'd fought for mission objectives and national interests. Today, they were fighting for two children who'd become more important than his own life. Danny, you should know this isn't just a mission for me anymore. Those kids, their family. Danny nodded, understanding immediately. Then we make sure they get to grow up safe. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. Jake checked his watch. 20 minutes until full sunrise, when the thermal imaging advantage would diminish. Time to gear up, Danny said, handing Jake a tactical vest and additional magazines. Just like old times. Just like old times, Jake agreed. But he knew this was different. In the military, they'd fought for abstract concepts: freedom, democracy, national security. Today, they were fighting for something tangible and precious, the chance for two wounded children to have a future. He thought about Emma and Tommy hidden beneath the porch, trusting him to come back, believing in his promise to keep them safe. That trust was worth more than any medal he'd earned in uniform. While Danny coordinated with his team over encrypted radio, Jake made his way to the crawl space beneath the porch. He needed to check on the children and prepare them for what was coming. Emma's voice reached him before he could see them. "I'm not scared, Tommy. Jake promised he'd come back, and he keeps his promises. But what if the bad people are stronger than Jake? Then we'll be brave like Mom and Dad taught us." Jake's throat tightened. These children were comforting each other with courage they shouldn't have needed to develop. He knocked softly on the hidden panel. "It's Jake. You two doing okay in there?" Emma's face appeared first, followed by Tommy clutching his wooden horse. Both children looked tired but alert, their eyes reflecting the LED light he'd left with them. "We heard more helicopters," Emma said, "and cars. I know, but I've got help now. Remember I told you about my army friends? One of them is here." Tommy scooted closer to the opening. "Is he nice like you?" "He's a good man. His name is Danny, and he helped me save people when we were soldiers together." Jake studied their faces, seeing fear held in check by trust. These children had been through hell, but they still believed in the possibility of safety. He couldn't let them down. "Emma, I need to ask you something important. When your parents were working on their story about the bad people, did they ever mention names, specific people they were investigating?" Emma bit her lip, the same gesture Jake had noticed when she was deciding whether to trust him. They had a notebook. Mom wrote everything down: names, places, dates. "Do you know where that notebook is?" "Tommy has it." Jake looked at the 5-year-old boy, who was now digging through a small backpack Jake hadn't noticed before. Tommy pulled out a composition book, its pages swollen with careful notes and photographs tucked between the covers. "Mum said to keep it safe," Tommy said solemnly. "She said it was important for stopping the bad people." Jake accepted the notebook with reverence, understanding he was holding evidence that had cost Sarah and David Carter their lives. He flipped through pages of meticulous investigation, financial records, photographs of meetings, detailed timelines of trafficking operations. "Your parents were very brave," Jake said, "and very smart. This information could help put the bad people in jail." "Will it make them stop hurting other children?" Emma asked. "Yes, it will." Jake found a page that made his blood run cold. A photograph of Marcus Kellerman shaking hands with Deputy Director Richardson, dated 3 months ago. Below it, Sarah Carter's handwriting, Federal Protection for Trafficking Network confirmed. Richardson receiving $50,000 monthly from Kellerman shell companies. Emma, Tommy, listen to me carefully. Your parents weren't just reporters. They were heroes. They died trying to save children they'd never met. Kids who were being hurt by very bad people. Emma's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I know. I heard them talking before they left. They said even if something happened to them, the children would be safer because of what they found out. Jake felt his own eyes burning. These kids understood sacrifice in ways that humbled him. Their parents had made the ultimate choice, their children's future safety over their own lives. Jake, Tommy's small voice cut through the emotion. When the bad people are gone, will you tell us more stories about Mom and Dad? I'll tell you everything I can find out about them, how brave they were, how much they loved you, how proud they'd be of how strong you've both been. Emma reached out and took Jake's hand. Jake, if something happens to you tonight, we know you tried your best. You don't have to be scared for us. The simple acceptance in her voice nearly broke him. An 8-year-old child was giving him permission to risk his life for her and her brother. She understood the stakes, understood that sometimes good people had to fight dangerous battles. Nothing's going to happen to me, Jake said firmly, and nothing's going to happen to you too. That's a promise. Danny's voice came over the radio. Iron Horse, we've got movement. They're positioning for final approach. Jake carefully tucked the notebook into his tactical vest. Sarah and David Carter's investigation would see the light of day. Their sacrifice would mean something. I have to go now, he told the children. Remember the rules. Stay hidden, stay quiet, and trust that I'm coming back. Emma nodded and pulled Tommy closer to her. We love you, Jake. The words hit him like a physical blow, 3 simple words that changed everything. In 43 years of life, through military service and criminal enterprise, through violence and redemption, no one had ever said those words to him and meant them completely. I love you both too, he whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of his being. As he sealed the hidden panel and prepared for battle, Jake carried with him something more powerful than any weapon, the absolute certainty that he was fighting for the most important thing in the world. Jake was checking his ammunition when Danny's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Federal agents approaching your position. This is Deputy Director Richardson. We're here to extract the children safely. Lower your weapons and come out with your hands visible. Danny shot Jake a look. That's not right. They wouldn't announce themselves like that. Jake moved to the window and saw 3 black SUVs approaching slowly, emergency lights flashing. The vehicles stopped 100 yards from the cabin, and figures emerged wearing FBI tactical gear. Through his binoculars, Jake could see Richardson himself stepping out of the lead vehicle. Iron Horse, this is highly irregular, Danny said over the radio. Federal extraction teams don't operate with lights and announcements. But something else bothered Jake. Where were the helicopters? Where was the perimeter of vehicles Danny had reported? The desert around them was suddenly quiet except for the 3 SUVs and their occupants. Jake Morrison, Richardson's voice carried across the desert through a bullhorn. We know you're protecting Emma and Tommy Carter. We're here to take them into federal protective custody. Their safety is our primary concern. Jake felt ice forming in his stomach. Richardson sounded sincere, professional, exactly like a federal agent should sound. But Jake had seen the photograph in Sarah Carter's notebook, Richardson shaking hands with Marcus Kellerman, Richardson taking money from the trafficking network. Danny, something's wrong here. Copy that. My team's reporting the original perimeter has withdrawn. All the helicopters, gone. It's like they vanished. Jake studied the federal agents through his binoculars. Professional gear, correct procedures, official vehicles. If he didn't know better, he'd believe they were legitimate rescuers. But the timing was too convenient, too clean. Mr. Morrison, Richardson called out again. We have documentation proving you're involved with the Crimson Reapers Motorcycle Club. We know about your criminal history. Turn over the children and we can discuss immunity for your cooperation. That's when Jake saw it. One of the agents was adjusting his earpiece, and Jake caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze, a small snake tattoo on the man's neck. The same tattoo Marcus's lieutenant, Bobby Snake Rodriguez, had gotten in prison. "Danny, those aren't federal agents." "What do you mean?" "Look at the guy on the left, rear position. Snake tattoo. That's Bobby Rodriguez, one of Marcus's enforcers." Danny trained his binoculars on the figures. "Jesus Christ. They're wearing federal gear, but you're right. I recognize two other faces from your motorcycle club files." Jake's mind raced through the implications. The Crimson Reapers had somehow acquired federal equipment, vehicles, and credentials. They were impersonating FBI agents to get close enough to take the children without a fight. How the hell did they get federal gear? "Richardson," Danny said grimly. "He's not just taking money from the trafficking network, he's actively participating. He gave them everything they needed to look legitimate." Jake pulled out his service pistol and checked the safety. "Which means the real federal task force probably doesn't exist, or they're being fed false intelligence about our location." Richardson's voice came again, closer now as the agents advanced. "Mr. Morrison, we're running out of patience. The children have been through enough trauma. Let us help them." The performance was almost perfect. If Jake hadn't seen the evidence in Sarah Carter's notebook, if he hadn't spotted Bobby Rodriguez, he might have been fooled. Richardson had learned to sound exactly like what he pretended to be, a concerned federal official protecting children. "Danny, we need to warn the kids. If these fake agents get to them, they disappear forever, just like all the other children the network has taken." Jake thought about Emma and Tommy hidden beneath the porch, trusting that the adults above them would protect them from harm. They'd been betrayed by corrupt officials before, but this level of deception was beyond anything Jake had imagined. One of the fake agents was moving toward the cabin's backside, supposedly to secure the perimeter, but actually to cut off escape routes. Jake recognized the tactical movement. These weren't just bikers in stolen gear. They'd been trained for this kind of operation. "Iron Horse, what's the play?" Jake looked at Danny, his old squad leader, the man who'd taught him that sometimes the mission required making impossible choices. But this wasn't about mission parameters or acceptable losses. This was about two children who called him family. "We don't let them take the kids. Even if it means fighting federal agents?" "They're not federal agents," Jake said firmly. "They're child traffickers wearing uniforms. That makes them enemy combatants." Danny nodded slowly, understanding. They'd fought in wars where the enemy sometimes wore friendly uniforms, where the distinction between ally and threat wasn't always clear. But this was clear. Anyone trying to take Emma and Tommy was the enemy. "Mr. Morrison," Richardson called out one final time, "this is your last chance to do this peacefully." Jake keyed his radio to the emergency frequency he'd taught the children. "Emma, Tommy, if you can hear this, do not come out for anyone wearing uniforms. Stay hidden no matter what happens." Jake's radio crackled with Danny's voice, tight with urgency. "Iron Horse, I've got intel from my DC contact. You're not going to like this. Talk to me. There is no federal task force. Richardson reported to his superiors that the children were recovered 3 days ago and are in protective custody. Officially, this case is closed." Jake felt the world shift beneath him. "Which means nobody's coming to help. Nobody even knows we're here. Richardson has created a complete black hole in the federal system." Jake watched through his binoculars as the fake agents continued their approach, their movements professional but somehow wrong. Now he could see more details that betrayed their true nature: wrong holster positions for federal agents, tattoos visible beneath tactical gear, the subtle swagger that marked them as bikers playing dress-up. How deep does this go? "Deeper than we thought. My contact found an encrypted hard drive in Carlisle's apartment before they cleaned it out. Financial records showing the trafficking network has been operating for over a decade, moving children internationally, protected by federal corruption at the highest levels." Jake thought about the Carter's notebook, about the careful documentation of crimes that spanned years. Sarah and David hadn't just stumbled onto a local trafficking ring, they'd uncovered a massive operation with tentacles reaching into every level of law enforcement. "Danny, the hard drive, does it have names?" "Dozens. Judges, prosecutors, ICE officials, Border Patrol agents. The network isn't just protected by corruption, it's run by it. One of the fake agents had reached the cabin's front porch, his weapon drawn but held low. Professional positioning. But Jake noticed the man's trigger discipline was wrong, finger on the trigger instead of alongside the guard. Military training would have corrected that habit. "Mr. Morrison," Richardson called out, "now only 50 yards away. We can see movement in the cabin. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Jake keyed his radio to Danny. "How many of your team are in position?" "3 snipers, good coverage. But Iron, if we engage, we're fighting people wearing federal identification. Even if they're fake, the optics are terrible." "The optics don't matter if Emma and Tommy disappear into a trafficking network." Jake moved to the back window and saw another fake agent approaching the hidden crawl space. The man was using a handheld device that looked like federal surveillance equipment, but moved with the jerky, unpracticed motions of someone unfamiliar with the technology. "Danny, the agent at my 6 is carrying detection equipment if he finds the kids." "Copy." "Rodriguez?" "That's him." Jake watched Bobby Rodriguez work his way around the cabin's perimeter, clearly searching for alternative entrances or hiding spots. Rodriguez had always been Marcus's bloodhound, good at finding people who didn't want to be found. But he was also impulsive, violent, and prone to mistakes under pressure. The radio crackled with a new voice, Emma's whisper, barely audible. "Jake, we can hear footsteps above us. Someone's walking on the porch." Jake's heart hammered. The children were directly beneath where one of the fake agents was now standing. If the man had any kind of detection equipment, he'd find them within minutes. "Stay perfectly still," Jake whispered back. "Don't make any sound." "Mr. Morrison," Richardson's voice had taken on an edge of impatience, "we have thermal imaging showing multiple heat signatures in that cabin. We know you're not alone." Jake realized they were being forced into an impossible position. The fake agents couldn't actually breach the cabin without revealing their true nature. Real federal agents would follow specific protocols, announce warrants, attempt negotiation, but they also couldn't withdraw without the children, which meant they were planning to kill everyone and stage the scene afterward. "Danny, they're not planning to take prisoners, I know. Richardson's been cleaning house. Anyone who gets too close to the trafficking network ends up dead or disappeared." Jake thought about Carlisle, supposedly dead of a heart attack, about Sarah and David Carter killed while investigating, about dozens of children who'd vanished without trace. The pattern was clear. Richardson eliminated problems permanently. "The hard drive Carlisle had," Jake said. "Where is it now?" "Secure location. My contact made copies before the apartment was cleaned out. But Iron, that evidence only matters if someone lives to present it." Jake understood. They weren't just fighting for Emma and Tommy's immediate safety, they were fighting to ensure the evidence of systemic corruption would see daylight. If Richardson eliminated them all tonight, the trafficking network would continue operating with federal protection. "Rodriguez is getting closer to the kid's position," Jake reported. "I need to take him out." "Negative. The moment we engage, Richardson will call in real backup. We'll be fighting actual federal agents who think they're rescuing children from terrorists." Jake felt the tactical situation closing around them like a trap. Richardson had positioned them perfectly. Any aggressive action would make them appear to be the criminals, while any passive response would result in the children's capture. But sometimes, Jake reflected, the only way out of a perfect trap was to spring it deliberately and deal with the consequences. Jake made his decision in the space between heartbeats. Bobby Rodriguez was 15 feet from the crawl space where Emma and Tommy were hidden, sweeping his detection device in methodical patterns. In 30 seconds, maybe less, he'd find them. "Danny, I'm going to create a distraction. When Rodriguez moves to investigate, your snipers take him down. Iron, that's going to expose your position to Richardson's team." "I know." Jake pulled a small explosive device from his tactical pack, a flashbang grenade he'd kept from his military days. Not lethal, but loud and disorienting enough to draw attention away from the children's hiding spot. "Emma, Tommy," he whispered into the radio, "I'm going to make a loud noise. Cover your ears and stay down no matter what happens." "Okay, Jake." Emma's voice came back, steady despite the fear he could hear beneath it. Jake positioned himself at the cabin's side window, calculating angles and timing. He'd have maybe 3 seconds after the flashbang detonated before Rodriguez and the other fake agents converged on his position. 3 seconds to confirm the children were safe, then he'd have to move fast. Ghost Rider, on my mark. Standing by. Jake pulled the pin and counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. He hurled the flashbang toward the front of the cabin, away from the children, but close enough to Rodriguez to pull him off his search pattern. The explosion lit up the pre-dawn darkness like artificial lightning, the sound echoing off the desert rocks. Jake saw Rodriguez stumble, his detection device forgotten as he spun toward the noise. Danny's sniper took the shot. Rodriguez dropped without a sound, his body crumpling beside the cabin's front steps. The other fake agents immediately went tactical, assuming combat positions and scanning for threats. Federal agents taking fire, Richardson shouted into his radio, playing his role perfectly. Repeat, Federal agents under attack, request immediate backup. Jake knew that radio call was being transmitted to real federal communications networks, probably to local law enforcement as well. Within minutes, legitimate authorities would be responding to reports of federal agents under assault. Richardson was turning the entire system against them. Danny, how long before real backup arrives? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if we're lucky. Jake moved through the cabin, keeping low beneath the windows. Outside, he could hear Richardson coordinating his remaining men, using proper federal tactical language. The performance was flawless, except for one detail: real federal agents wouldn't have abandoned cover to check on Rodriguez's body. Iron Horse, we've got movement from the southeast, vehicles approaching fast. Jake's heart sank. Backup was arriving ahead of schedule, which meant Richardson had more resources than they'd anticipated. Through his binoculars, Jake counted 4 additional vehicles, lights flashing, approaching at high speed. But something was wrong with the approaching vehicles. They weren't maintaining formation, weren't following federal approach protocols. And when Jake adjusted his binoculars, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Motorcycles. A dozen Harley-Davidsons riding escort around the SUVs, their riders wearing the unmistakable colors of the Crimson Reapers. Danny, those aren't federal reinforcements, it's the Brotherhood. Jesus, how many? 15, maybe 20 riders. Plus whoever's in the vehicles. Jake realized Richardson's plan was even more sophisticated than he'd imagined. The deputy director wasn't just using federal authority to cover the trafficking network. He was coordinating a joint operation between corrupt federal agents and the motorcycle club, making it impossible to distinguish legitimate law enforcement from criminals. Ghost Rider, we need to extract the packages now, before the cavalry arrives. Copy. Moving to extraction point Bravo. Jake gathered his essential gear and the evidence notebook, then made his way to the crawl space. Emma and Tommy were exactly where he'd left them, pressed against the back wall but alert and ready. Time to go, kids. We're taking a little trip. Emma helped Tommy out of the hiding spot, both children moving with quiet efficiency. Jake was struck again by how well they'd adapted to crisis, how quickly they'd learned to function under pressure. No 8- and 5-year-old should have those skills. Where are we going? Tommy asked, clutching his wooden horse. Somewhere safe, but we have to move fast and stay quiet. Jake led them to the cabin's back door, checking the approach route Danny had mapped earlier. 200 yards of open ground to reach the rocky outcropping where Danny's team waited, then another half-mile through canyon country to the extraction point. Outside, the sound of motorcycle engines grew louder. Marcus Kellerman's voice carried across the desert, shouting orders to his riders. Jake recognized the tone. Marcus was in full predator mode, savoring the hunt. "Iron!" Marcus's voice boomed through a bullhorn. "You betrayed the Brotherhood, you bastard. Now you're going to pay." Jake handed Emma a small emergency beacon. "If we get separated, activate this. Danny's team will find you." "We won't get separated," Emma said firmly. "We stick together. That's what families do." Jake looked at these 2 brave children who'd chosen to trust him with their lives and felt something settle in his chest. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, he'd make sure they had a chance at the future their parents had died trying to secure. Jake led Emma and Tommy through the cabin's back door into the pre-dawn darkness, their footsteps muffled by sand and scrub brush. Behind them, Marcus's voice continued echoing across the desert, coordinating with Richardson's remaining fake agents. Spread out and cover all approaches. Iron's got military training, but he's protecting 2 kids. That makes him predictable. Jake crouched behind a large boulder with the children, studying the terrain ahead. Danny had positioned a 2-way mirror fragment on a distant rock, angled to reflect light signals. 3 quick flashes meant the extraction route was clear. Jake waited, counting seconds. Flash. 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 Okay, kids, we move fast and quiet. Stay low, follow exactly in my footsteps. Emma took Tommy's hand, and Jake felt a surge of pride at their courage. These children had been through hell, but they trusted him completely. That trust was both humbling and terrifying. They moved in single-file formation through the desert scrub, Jake using his military training to pick routes that offered maximum concealment. Behind them, searchlights began sweeping the area around the cabin, but the beams couldn't reach their position yet. "Iron!" Marcus's voice carried clearly in the thin air. "I know you can hear me. You think you can protect those kids. You think you're some kind of hero now." Jake ignored the taunts, focusing on the rocky outcropping where Danny's team waited, 50 yards to go. Behind them, he could hear motorcycle engines revving, the Reapers positioning for a systematic search. That's when Tommy stumbled. The 5-year-old caught his toe on a hidden root and went down hard, his wooden horse flying from his grip and clattering against a rock. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the desert silence. "Tommy," Emma whispered, dropping to help her brother. Jake spun around, listening for any indication they'd been heard. For a moment, the desert was quiet except for the distant rumble of engines. Then, a voice called out from the direction of the cabin. "Movement, 2 o'clock, approximately 200 yards. Searchlights immediately swung toward their position. Jake grabbed both children and dove behind a cluster of barrel cacti, just as the first beam swept over their previous location. "Stay down," Jake breathed, his mouth close to Emma's ear. "Don't move, don't breathe hard." The searchlight moved in methodical patterns, probing shadows and checking concealment points. Jake could hear boots on the ground. Now someone was approaching their position on foot. Through the spines of the cactus, Jake saw a figure moving toward them. Not one of Marcus's bikers, but one of Richardson's fake agents, carrying what looked like military-grade night vision equipment. The man moved carefully, professionally, but there was something off about his positioning. Jake recognized the approaching figure, Tommy "Ice" Coleman, Richardson's personal enforcer. Jake had tangled with Ice during his Brotherhood days, back when territorial disputes sometimes involved federal intervention. Ice was competent, brutal, and completely without conscience. "I know you're out here, Morrison," Ice called softly. "Richardson wants to make a deal. You give us the kids and the evidence. We let you walk away. Clean slate, no questions asked." Jake felt Emma tense beside him. She was smart enough to understand that any deal Richardson offered would end with a bullet in Jake's back and the children disappearing forever. Ice was 20 feet away now, his night vision goggles sweeping methodically. In another 30 seconds, he'd spot them despite their concealment. Jake made calculations he could take Ice in a straight fight, but not without noise that would bring the entire search party down on them. That's when Danny's voice crackled softly through Jake's earpiece. "Iron Horse, I have eyes on your shadow. Give me the word." Jake looked at Emma and Tommy, pressed against him in the darkness, trusting him to keep them safe. He thought about their parents, about Carlisle, about all the children who'd disappeared into Richardson's network because good people had hesitated at crucial moments. "Take the shot," Jake whispered. The sniper's bullet took Ice center mass, dropping him silently into the desert sand. Jake immediately gathered the children and moved toward the extraction point, knowing they had minutes before Ice's absence was noticed. "Ghost Rider, packages are moving to rally point. Copy. We've got eyes on multiple hostiles converging on your last position. Move fast." Jake pushed the pace as much as he dared with the children, Emma helping Tommy across rough terrain with practiced efficiency. Behind them, shouts erupted as Ice's body was discovered. "They killed Tommy!" Richardson's voice carried clearly. "All units, weapons free, these are armed terrorists." Jake knew that radio transmission was being recorded, would be used as evidence that federal agents had been murdered by domestic terrorists. Richardson was building a narrative that would justify any level of violence in response. The rocky outcropping loomed ahead, and Jake could see Danny's position marker, a tiny infrared light, visible only through night vision equipment. Safety was less than 100 yards away. But Marcus Kellerman's voice boomed across the desert, and Jake's blood turned cold at the words. "Burn them out. Fire everything." The first explosion lit up the desert like a miniature sundae. Jake threw himself over Emma and Tommy as debris rained down around them, chunks of burning wood and metal from what had been the cabin's front porch. Marcus wasn't just hunting them, he was trying to destroy any evidence of what had happened here. "Move! Move! Move!" Jake shouted, hauling both children to their feet. They ran through clouds of smoke and dust, Jake's military training taking over as he navigated by instinct and memory toward Danny's position. Behind them, motorcycle engines roared to life, and Jake knew the Reapers were beginning their final assault. A muzzle flash erupted from the rocks ahead, Danny's team engaging the approaching bikers. Jake heard the distinctive crack of military-grade sniper rifles, followed by the crash of motorcycles going down. But there were too many attackers, approaching from multiple directions. "Danny, we're 30 seconds out," Jake called into his radio. "Copy. Taking heavy fire. Richardson's got military hardware." As if to emphasize the point, another explosion rocked the desert, this one much closer. Jake recognized the sound grenades, probably stolen from federal armories. Richardson wasn't just corrupt, he was arming criminals with government weapons. Emma stumbled, and Jake scooped her up without breaking stride. Tommy ran beside them, still clutching his wooden horse, his small legs working furiously to keep pace. These children had more courage than most soldiers Jake had served with. A motorcycle burst through the smoke directly ahead of them, its rider wearing Reaper colors and carrying an assault rifle. Jake recognized the man, Carlos Razor Mendez, one of Marcus's most vicious enforcers. "There they are!" Razor screamed, swinging his weapon toward the children. Jake set Emma down and drew his service pistol in one fluid motion, muscle memory from countless hours of combat training taking over. 2 shots, center mass. Razor's motorcycle careened into a boulder, its rider dead before he hit the ground. "Stay behind me," Jake told the children, leading them around the wreckage. They reached the rocky outcropping where Danny's team had established their position. Jake could see muzzle flashes from 3 different positions, Danny's men engaging targets across a wide front. The extraction point was just beyond the ridge, but getting there meant crossing 50 yards of open ground under fire. "Iron Horse." Danny's voice came from a concealed position between 2 boulders. "Richardson's pulling back his people. He's letting the Reapers take the risks." Jake understood the tactic. If the bikers killed everyone, Richardson could claim he'd tried to negotiate peacefully, but had been forced to let local allies handle domestic terrorists. If the bikers failed, Richardson could eliminate them as witnesses and claim credit for stopping a criminal conspiracy. Another motorcycle appeared, then 2 more, racing across the desert in formation. Jake pushed Emma and Tommy into a natural depression in the rocks, just as automatic weapons fire erupted around them. Bullets sparked off stone, sending chips flying. Emma had pulled out the emergency whistle Jake had given her earlier, holding it ready but waiting for his signal. Smart girl, she understood that the wrong sound at the wrong time could draw enemy fire toward their position. "Jake," Tommy's voice was small but steady, "are we going to be okay?" "We're going to be fine, buddy. Just stay down and trust me." Jake peered over the rock barrier, counting targets. 6 motorcycles still operational, plus Richardson's remaining fake agents positioned around the burning cabin. But Danny's team was picking them off methodically, using superior position and training to offset the enemy's numerical advantage. Marcus Kellerman's voice boomed across the battlefield, carried by radio or bullhorn. "Iron, you can't protect them forever. Give them up, and I'll make your death quick." Jake keyed his radio to respond, making sure his voice carried clearly. "Marcus, you want them? Come and take them yourself, you coward." The taunt had its intended effect. Jake could hear Marcus screaming orders, demanding that his men press the attack, regardless of casualties. Angry leaders made tactical mistakes, and Marcus had always been prone to rage when challenged directly. Two more motorcycles roared toward their position, riders firing wildly. Danny's snipers took down one immediately, but the second man made it to within 20 yards before Jake's pistol dropped him. "Ghost Rider, what's our extraction status?" "Helicopter inbound, ETA 3 minutes, but we need to reach the landing zone." Jake looked at the open ground between their position and the extraction point. 50 yards of desert floor with minimal cover, while hostile forces held positions on 3 sides. It was the kind of tactical situation that had no good solutions. But sometimes, Jake reflected as he checked his remaining ammunition, the only way forward was straight through the problem. "Emma, Tommy," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them, "remember when I taught you about being brave? This is one of those times." The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the gunfire, growing louder with each passing second. Jake could see the aircraft approaching from the north, a military Black Hawk that definitely wasn't part of Richardson's corrupt operation. "That's our ride," Danny shouted over the noise. 60 seconds to touchdown." Jake gathered Emma and Tommy close to him, their small faces dirt-streaked but determined. "When I say run, you run straight for that helicopter. Don't look back, don't stop for anything. Danny's team will cover us." Emma nodded, then surprised him by reaching into her pocket. She pulled out his dog tags, the ones he'd given her earlier. "You'll need these," she said, placing them around his neck. "Soldiers should wear their tags." The gesture hit Jake harder than any bullet could have. This 8-year-old girl, in the middle of a firefight, was thinking about his identity, his honor, his place in the world. She saw him not as the broken ex-biker he'd been, but as the protector he'd chosen to become. "Ready?" Jake asked. Both children nodded. "Go!" They broke from cover, Jake leading with Emma and Tommy close behind. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Jake felt a bullet tug at his vest, another spark off the rocks beside him, but he kept moving forward. Danny's sniper team laid down covering fire, their shots precise and devastating. Jake saw 2 more Reapers go down, their motorcycles crashing in clouds of dust and flame. But more kept coming. Marcus had committed everything to this final assault. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of sand and noise, its side door already open. Jake could see the crew chief waving them forward, automatic weapon ready to provide suppressive fire. 30 yards to go. That's when Marcus Kellerman himself appeared, roaring across the desert on his custom Harley, an assault rifle strapped across his back and murder in his eyes. The Brotherhood president had finally decided to finish this personally. "Iron," Marcus screamed over the engine noise, "you betrayed everything we stood for." Jake pushed the children toward the helicopter and turned to face his former president. Marcus had been like a father to him once, back when Jake was young and angry and looking for belonging. But that relationship had been built on violence and fear, not love and trust. "I stood for something better," Jake shouted back, drawing his service pistol. Marcus gunned his engine, racing directly toward them. Jake had seconds to make a choice, dive for cover and let Marcus reach the children, or stand his ground and end this. He stood his ground. Jake's first shot shattered Marcus's front headlight. His second took out the front tire. The Harley went down in a spectacular crash, throwing Marcus across 30 feet of desert floor. But the Brotherhood president rolled to his feet, surprisingly agile for a man his age, and came up with his rifle ready. The 2 men faced each other across 50 feet of sand, weapons drawn, everything that had gone wrong between them distilled into this single moment. "You could have been my successor," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "You could have had everything." "I didn't want everything," Jake replied. "I just wanted to be something other than what you made me." Marcus raised his rifle, but Jake was faster. 3 shots, center mass, the kind of grouping his military instructors would have been proud of. Marcus Kellerman, president of the Crimson Reapers, killer of innocents and corrupter of men, fell to the desert sand and moved no more. Jake turned toward the helicopter, where Emma and Tommy waited in the crew chief's protective embrace. But one more figure emerged from the smoke, Deputy Director Richardson, his federal credentials forgotten, a pistol in his hand and desperation in his eyes. "You've destroyed everything," Richardson screamed. "Years of careful work." But Danny Martinez stepped out from behind a boulder, his rifle trained on the corrupt federal official. "Drop your weapon, now." Richardson looked around wildly, seeing Danny's team emerging from concealment, seeing the evidence of his conspiracy scattered across the battlefield. His trafficking network was exposed, his cover blown, his allies dead or fleeing. He dropped his gun and raised his hands. Jake walked to the helicopter, where Emma and Tommy were waiting for him. As he climbed aboard, Emma handed him a new photograph, this one taken with the crew chief's camera. It showed the three of them together, dirty and exhausted but alive. A family. "We made it," Tommy said, his voice full of wonder. "We made it," Jake agreed, settling into the seat between them as the helicopter lifted off. Below them, the desert stretched endlessly, but ahead lay something Jake had never dared hope for: a future built on love instead of violence, trust instead of fear. A future where two brave children could grow up safe and a broken man could finally come home.